Here's just some of what you can expect from the inhuman creatures of D&D's greatest fan mod. Tiger people who conquered a subcontinent with the power of math autism. Goblins who decided not to collect butterflies but to be collected by butterflies. Harpies who just said, F it, we're basically Valkyries, let's just be Valkyries. And finally, Shrek. Yes, the mod has Shrek, but not the sequels. This is Anbennar, D&D's greatest fan game. I gave Anbennar some coverage last year, since it's one of my favorite and most beloved modding projects on the entire internet. This is a world that has been built by a vast team of hundreds of highly organized developers over many years. It's a testament to their dedication that they've managed to build such an impossibly in-depth world within the engine of Europa Universalis 4, which is admittedly a really weird place to find a D&D world of staggering complexity. Well, that is if you aren't familiar with the storytelling prowess of the Paradox modding community. I'm not gonna lie to you all, I expected that video was going to bomb since it was little more than a passion project for a thing I like. To my surprise, the community rallied together and all got really interested in Anbennar, which was really surprising since it meant I convinced a ton of people that it was worth it to pick up a decade-old janky grand strategy game. And I'm proud of you guys, because this world really is one of the best fantasy settings being written about in the modern day. It's worth it. Also, the Victoria 3 version is coming out pretty soon, actually. I know the date, I don't think I'm allowed to tell you though. It's soon, though. Anbennar is an effort to take a medieval D&D world like the Forgotten Realms, and to simulate the way that it would grow into an industrial fantasy world akin to Eberron. The result is breathtaking and utterly enthralling. Also, yes, there's a ton of Warhammer Fantasy influence too. I didn't mention that last time, but everybody noticed. Okay, flashing on screen right now is the tags that you should play that are most similar to your favorite factions. Okay, let's go. Anyway, all of that lore that I dropped in that first video was really just barely scratching the surface of this world. We left so many gaps. And one of those gaps that people noticed was the monstrous species in this world. We covered the orcs pretty well, how they went from the mad science experiment of a megalomaniacal elf to eventually free people after their greatest leader was killed by Corin in the Green Tide. But many questions were still asked nonetheless about the monsters of this world, especially the Gnolls, who were largely just demon-worshipping slavers when they were interacting with our story last time. But they are so much more than that. Sometimes they're demon-worshipping slavers who also wish to devour the sun. But no, the Gnolls, like everyone in Anbennar, are complicated. The Gnolls that people see wandering human lands are all slavers, because human lands are where Gnolls go to get slaves. The ones who aren't slavers just stayed home in the savannah. Not to say that all of those Gnolls are saints, though. Many of the homeland Gnolls will still practice slavery, but without it being as much of a cultural and religious thing. It's not a cultural obsession, you know? Back in the old homelands, there are many Gnolls who are just normal people, eternally fighting against their demon-worshipping brethren and striving to live up to crafty Gnollish survival virtues. I'll give you the full rundown of the Gnolls of this world in a bit, but first I want to cover the iconic monster nation of Anbennar. Not orcs, not gnolls, centaurs, ogres, or harpies, but the deceptively primitive kobolds of the Dragon Coast. And before we get into that, I want to take a second to talk to you about a project I'm voice acting in soon, called Scorched Basin, which is up on Kickstarter right now. Scorched Basin is a system-agnostic Mad Max-themed tabletop setting, meaning that you can get your lunatic road warring done in any tabletop system you like. Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Daggerheart, Vagabond, goddang Imperium Maledictum if you so choose. Scorched Basin is a fascinating world of nomads, mystics, and a sort of apocalyptic cyberpunk dynasty. This project has a lot of cool details that other settings would take for granted. Details that are going to enhance your table play immensely. I'm talking like they thought through all of the local plants and animals and created alchemy recipes using all of them, that level of detail. There's a custom magic system, custom languages, including one that's even sign language based. Scorched Basin is the coolest new tabletop setting on Kickstarter right now, and you should go check it out. And behind the scenes, this project is community powered. Over 100 tabletop RPG creators of various types have contributed to this project, including me, because many of the NPCs in this setting have voice samples to set the mood. I basically got to play the settings version of Wormtongue. Have a listen.
Oh, of course, my Emperor. I will have someone fetch that for you immediately. While I am here, you have nothing to fear. Nothing.
And if you act fast on the Kickstarter, there's a special tier for the first 500 people who back it that nets you some additional goodies. I hope you guys enjoyed this project. Now, let's get back to Anbennar. We didn't talk about the entire continent of Canor last video. Mainly just the shattered lands of Castanor and Escan. Well, this video is still going to leave a few big gaps in the continent for us to talk about another day, but the story of the Kobolds of Anbennar will do a great deal to fill out the north of the continent. The Kobolds are very much like their Dungeons and Dragons counterparts. Small, fast-talking, and community-oriented, as well as just completely obsessed with trap-making. For 1,000 years, they've wandered the Dragon Coast, isolated from the rest of Canor. Perhaps they could have gotten along with the other species. Perhaps they could have been considered something other than monsters, had it not been for the Dragon Wake.
Father, the sleeper has awakened!
Let's rewind, but a really long way, for this whole event was a long time coming. Like so much in the world of Anbennar, the precursor elves are a big part of what went wrong here. In the distant prehistory of prehistories, the world was divided up by dragons, genies, and giants. Not much is known about this period, save that one dragon, Maliath, ascended to become a sort of demigod of dragonkind. At some point in this long history of mythological empires, the dragons were pushed back, mostly, to Elentir, where they were eventually overthrown by their slaves, the elves. Yeah, that's right, the elves may have been the catalyst for what went wrong today, but for once, they didn't do it by being bastards. Of course, by the looks of things, it appears that the elves who led the slave revolts in northern Elentir just kind of, took over being the slave masters of the southern Elentiri elves, so cancel that, the elves are still bastards. The consistency is nonetheless respectable. Anyway, with Jinn, giants, and elves all pressing down on them, the dragons decided, you know what, maybe let's just wait this thing out actually. I mean, how long can mortal empires last anyway? They retreated to their ancient havens, mostly in Canor, and locked themselves deep underground where they began to hibernate. Now, dragons are mortal in Anbennar. However, they do still last about 3,000 waking years, but they can extend that so much farther with hibernation. Thus, the ancient dragons from about 11,000 years back were still alive and all happily asleep below the world during the events that we discussed last video. The occasional dragon, such as the silver one that helped Castan's people, would wake up and perform a few deeds now and then. But for the most part, the species was dormant. On the surface, the great creatures of the world began to recede. The giants were defeated and eaten alive by the ogres. The precursors retreated back to Elentir for an age of reflection. The genies began to fade in prominence and diminished in a series of revolts, as humans kept inventing new inventive ways to capture them in various inanimate objects, like lamps, rings, and golems. The remaining genies poofed and disappeared on the day of ashen skies, leaving the captured lamp genies the only ones still on the mortal plane. Canor was now a power vacuum, ready for the young species to fill up the map. Also, lots of Fae there, but a certain beast-hating Castan would eventually put a stop to all that. Castan Beastbane just kinda shows up at random places in this video. When you're talking about the monsters, they can all just kind of point out on their family tree which of their family members he killed. He's this video's Ducaniel. The Age of Antiquity had begun. In the east, Castanor rose up as a mighty empire. In the west, the people of Demiria formed a mighty seafaring republic. And in the northwest, where our tale is set, was the Gnomish hierarchy. The small folk had arrived in a great migration from their ancestral lands in distant Sarhal. There they formed largely two groups. the halflings of Small Country, who remained more or less as they were pre-migration, and the gnomes of the Dragon Coast, who were warped and changed by the magical Damesteer crystals in the area. Mining such crystals brought the gnomes great wealth and power. The civilization they formed, the hierarchy, developed rapidly, with advanced philosophy, architecture, and arcane studies flourishing. They had human subjects, halfling subjects, and ruled with quick minds and clever geopolitical plays, rather than all-out military dominance. The Day of Ashen Skies hit the continent hard. The ruin of Aelentir in Year 1 torched the skies and withered crops all over the world. The three great powers slowly recede, hierarchy included. The frontiers revolt and break away, the armies shatter, and no one shall again be capable of projecting power on this continent for a long, long time. Of note to our story are the Hellenic humans to the east. Castanor stretched over the Allen River, but never quite tamed the barbarians of the Great Woods, no matter how many trees they burned. This region would be left a disorganized mess of warlike tribes as Castanor withdrew back into its heartlands. North even of that were the Gerudians, the untamed wild men of the frozen north. Nothing to say about them yet, but keep an eye on those guys. That is still the state of northern Canor in the year 400 after Ash. An ailing gnomish hierarchy that is slowly losing more and more ground. Rebellious and fractious subjects, wild forest barbarians to the east, and also the cold Gerudians perched to the north. And below all of them slept the dragons. But one dragon was not asleep. Far, far to the east, the golden dragon Balrus was alive and well. He's one of the eldest living creatures, and he's grown wise and benevolent after wandering the world in human form for centuries. He, like Maliath and only a few others before him, managed to ascend, becoming an immortal dragon. How he did so is notably different from the others who accomplished that feat, though. Magic was not involved, only enlightenment. After the Day of Ashen Skies, Balrus stepped out into the open, settling in distant Yanshin and unveiling his children, the gold-scale Kobolds. He taught them wisdom, philosophy, art, and ethics. These golden dragon folk became beloved residents of the Far East, their mere scales revered as lucky. Now, the direct motives of Balrus the Gold in what's to come are left unconfirmed, but I think even without an official lore answer, it's reasonably obvious why he did what he did. The dragons were slumbering, waiting for the precursors, the genies, and the giants to fall so that dragonkind could safely lick their wounds and return to the world. Well, with the Day of Ashen Skies having come and gone, the Precursor Empire, the last great enemy of dragonkind, had been broken. Balrus had not only woken up, but he had found an honored place in the world for himself and his kobold progeny. So, where are all the other dragons? It's been 400 years! They really ought to wake up and get to work at this point. The mortals are just so fascinating, and they're in need of draconic wisdom and guidance. That is my suspicion as to why Balrus left the Gold-Scale Kobolds, and why he set out to wake the other dragons. I could be wrong though, grain of salt here, but his motivations don't seem particularly mysterious considering all the confirmed lore that we have around his circumstances. But again, I could be wrong. Maybe he actually wanted to wake up the dragons to stop some great distant threat or something. That is possible too. Anyway, Balrus the Gold had one problem with trying to wake up his peers. Damn, those guys really hid themselves well, didn't they? Where are they all? And I can't just tunnel beneath the world until I find them all. That's untenable. Instead, the great golden dragon begins to weave a spell to wake them all up at once. Just a tiny little magical startle to shock them out of their tunnels. And that way we can all meet up and have a big dragon conclave in my golden city. Fingers snapped, spell cast, now we wait. Except, well, the little startling symptom of the spell, it turned out to be much stronger than expected. Balrus had just accidentally driven all of the other dragons mad. For some of them, this was temporary, a few weeks or months acting as a wild, violent animal. But for others, it was permanent. Those he spoke to were entirely too insane, or just disinterested. Except for a dragon named Akhet, who we will briefly talk about when we discuss the Gnolls in the next lore section. He was spotted flying back east to Hellas, but largely disappeared from history, much to the disappointment of the gold-scale kobolds. Okay, let's jump tracks back to northern Canor. Ailing hierarchy, lots of barbarians. The year is 470. And now, the dragons are exploding out of the ground and burning everything. Now this actually happens everywhere all over the world, but nowhere was hit harder than the hierarchy and its neighbors. Those Hellenic barbarians were beset upon by creatures beyond their imaginings. Tribes unified and fled for their lives, crashing down upon Demiria and Castanor in ways that were akin to the Huns of our own timeline. They carved out important kingdoms for themselves that would remain relevant in later centuries, notably the Griffin Riders of Marhold in Escan and the power-hungry Imperial traitors of Wex in the Empire of Anbennar. Those that stayed finally threw in their lot with a warlord named Godric, who they called the King of Hellenics. Godric led his people to foray south, conquering vast swathes of territory in hope of finding a warmer land for his people, far from the rampaging dragons. They would conquer much of Lensinor and Small Country, until being thrown off centuries later with elven help. Now in the modern day, Godric's kingdom is called Gawed, and still fights with the great kingdom of Laurent for control over Small Country. To the north, a frost dragon rose up and brought an age of ice to Garudia, until the Scalds managed to rise up and sing and tell tales that would force the northern dragon back to sleep. But the Gnomish hierarchy got it all so much worse than its neighbors, because Takayan the Blue emerges, heralding a great storm that ravaged the coast, and behind him was an army of millions of kobolds. Not wise like the gold scales of the east, but feral, yipping beasts that were taught nothing by the mad dragons that made them. The hierarchy fought and died and were slaughtered en masse by the yip-yakking hordes. The entire civilization, most of their species, dead and gone, buried beneath the Kobold Rising. Many gnomes survived, fleeing into human lands or surviving in rump states like the city of Portnam that clutched tightly onto their human subjects. But the cliff gnomes, the dour and grim island gnomes off the coast, welcomed in as many as they could take. The backward Isle of Nimskad became the great home of the gnomish exiles. After 30 years of chaos, violence, and barbarian invasions, the Dragon Wake finally ended. Most of the dragons had snapped out of their violent frenzy by then, and the majority of those that hadn't were starting to thin out as heroes and more sane dragons slew the mad worms. The official end of the Dragon Wake came when a silver dragon, who the Castanorans claimed was the avatar of Castellos, slew the infamous black dragon Zamalot over the city of Castanor. Once again, I apologize because every time I mention this goddamn section of the map, I feel like I have to explain that 7 castles equals 1 castle rune, but if you do it on the 18th castle day of the castle month, then the whole thing actually castles out, and you're left with nothing but a single castle one. No more castles, let's get back to the cliff gnomes of Nimskad. For 1,000 years, they have schemed and negotiated and readied themselves to take back their hierarchy from the kobolds. Now, at game start, 1444, they are ready. Gnomish minds have invented weapons of war beyond human reckoning. The spark rifle stands ready to do the grim work of extermination and reclamation. There's a gnome's work to be done in the years to come. The kobolds, for the most part, have largely squandered the last 1,000 years, enjoying the sunny fields of the Dragon's Coast. They won this place with Maliath's blessing, they say, though the rest of Canor sees them as monsters, which admittedly is understandable considering that they showed up out of nowhere and killed an unfathomable number of gnomes. But we know from their golden counterparts that the kobolds are not monsters. Really, they're just children cast off into the world with parents that were driven to insanity. One would have hoped that the dragons who made them would have shown up and guided them, but that did not happen. Why not? Takayan the Blue, according to rumor, quickly sided with the gnomes once he snapped out of his frenzy. Seemed to have felt a little bit guilty over accidentally exterminating them all with his Maelstrom and Kobold Swarm. Now there are also green and red kobolds here on the Dragon Coast as well, and it's unclear if Takayan made them. If he didn't, then their likely creators are also not great parents. Greens would probably belong to Yorithel the Green, who created for herself a fey realm called the Dragon Dream, where she may forever live in the golden age of dragons. She sleeps in the enchanted, fey-tainted deep woods. When the Dragon Wake came, she was the very first to snap out of the spell. She burned a couple forests for a couple days, flipped Balrus off, and then went back to sleep. Bit of an absentee mom is what I'm saying. Nimrith the Red woke up in the dwarfhold of Cugdir and immediately went a plundering as he tried to amass the most wealth anyone has ever obtained, even burning down the wealthy cities of Damescrown, Old Laurentane, and Daemonath. He was just too busy being a dragon Viking to parent his kobolds, if indeed they are his. Without dragons to guide them, the kobolds are still tribal and primitive, because they've been completely cut off and isolated from the rest of the world, dismissed as monsters. But with the gnomes of Nimskad closing in, the kobolds must become more. It's time to set down traps, and it's time to prepare to receive spark rifle fire. Let's begin. But first, if you're liking this video, make like a dragon and sleep for 1,000 years atop the like button. And consider subscribing to the channel. I explore all sorts of video game franchises related to tabletop IP. Sometimes we deep dive lore like this, other times we dive deep into the production history. The kobolds of the Dragon Coast are divided in 3: red scales, green scales, and blue scales. The blue scales control the old cave systems and have the largest economy. The red scales control the coastline and have the largest fleet, thanks to the tireless efforts of a heroic raft maker, who just kept spamming the construct boat button every single time that the gnomish navy showed up to sink his fleet. The green scales are the worst off by far. Their homeland is separated from the other territories, cut off, wealth poor, and easily squashed by their neighbors. They are sort of the challenge start here if you're planning on playing kobolds. I choose to play as the red scales in my playthrough. They're only slightly poorer than the blue, but they also have a significantly better leader, and that is honestly way more important. Things have changed compared to the peace we kobolds have enjoyed in our homeland. For ages, the ends of our turf was nothing but a great fort held by the Reverians, who were a small kingdom of Garudians who settled here in the era of Black Ice, when Canor was still disorganized following the Dragon Wake. The Reverians were a coastal people, and weren't particularly intent upon making war against the kobolds or taking our land. Gawed recently assisted the gnomes in retaking that fort from the Reverians, in preparation for the gnomish reconquest. With Nimskad now building an advanced gnomish fort to serve as a launching point, the time of kobold isolationism must end. I begin a unification war against the blue scales. The petty rivalries must end if we're to survive what's to come. The blue scales are fierce, but we've got a big trick up our sleeve. Kobolds in Anbennar are so beloved because their militaries are completely different from how everyone else plays. Kobolds don't win battles, they just hide and let enemy armies walk into their traps. Europa Universalis 4 is a game that tracks your nation's available manpower pool. When your troops take casualties, they will need to be reinforced from the national manpower pool. When this runs out, no more reinforcements, and your losses will stop being replaced. Kobolds in Anbennar get to build trap forts, where normally an army sieging down a fort would take anywhere between like 1 to 2% casualties a month from attrition. These kobold trap forts will typically be doing more like 4 to 10% casualties a month. Thus, kobold warfare is about carefully placing forts, baiting your enemies onto those forts, and then bleeding them white as tens of thousands of soldiers die in traps. Kobold armies are really bad, and they will almost never win in a fair fight. Thus, you have to aim for unfair fights. It's weird, every war will feel like you're getting crushed. You're gonna lose every battle, your enemies will rampage through your lands, and then the turnaround when they run out of troops. The enemies of kobold kind will always run out of bodies to throw into our pit traps. And then the kobolds turn about and pounce. The rampage and the looting spree will begin. So it is against the blue scales. I let them die in my traps. Then I strike out and take their lands. It's not wildly easy, as the blue scales have traps of their own that I need to contend with. But in the end, they are bested, and I now own the entire Dragon Coast, as well as the pathetic dragon horde that the blues have been tossing coins into, deep inside the caverns. Up to the north, I noticed that the gnomes and the surrounding city-states have seized the greenscale lands. It won't be long now until the gnomes make their move against me. I notice, however, that the gnomes have actually kind of overplayed their hand here. They took their troops off of my border and sailed them off north where they fought our green cousins. My navy of advanced rafts are enough to go toe-to-toe with the Nimscod armada, so I pounce on the opportunity. I declare war before they're ready to strike, and I siege down the fort with my army and blockade the landing with my navy to stop any gnomish reinforcements. I occupy the fort, fight a few battles as my troops liberate the greenscale territory, and it's done. 1,000 years of gnomish preparation, botched by getting greedy in the north. It's now far too late to just go back to normal though, and everyone can see it. The fort that held the kobolds in check is now broken. The little draconic beasts have captured gnomish territory once again, and this time we haven't killed them all. The kobolds are primitive to the outside world, but to those in the know, that seems unlikely to last for long. Which is why the Kingdom of Gawed, one of the great powers of Canor, decides that now is the perfect time to strike. And you know what? They ain't wrong. Our armies are tired, our manpower is short, and the Hellenics know that hitting us now before we've gotten our shit together is the right call. Now, here with limited manpower, facing down one of the biggest and most numerous foes in the game, you would think that this would be the death of the playthrough. But kobolds do not fight fair. My armies have plenty of time to recover, because it's my trap forts that will be doing most of the work. I cursed myself for not setting up a trap fort in the north to block passage, but it actually worked out well for me that I didn't. The Gawedi armies surged into my lands and tried to split off and siege down all of the forts at once. It was a big tactical blunder, as it meant that I could simply stack all of my armies into one and go around smacking down isolated besiegers anytime they were getting close to breaking a fort. War with an enemy that should have been the death of my civilization was reduced to a mere game of kobold whack-a-mole. In the end, tens of thousands of Hellenic barbarians were killed by the traps, and the Northern Kingdom runs dry on bodies. I forced them to pay me enough money to get myself out of debt, and from that moment onward, the kobolds have broken containment. A long time was just spent consolidating, trying to understand the foreign institutions of feudalism and the Renaissance that seemed to be the building blocks of tech growth. But with a talented leader, good land, and safe borders, it's not as hard to catch up for the dragon folk as you might think. Tribal and primitive they have always been, but that's never really told the whole story. Listen, when your civilization is already building trap fortresses that require Excel spreadsheets to understand, it turns out that if you just apply those skills elsewhere, you're not really as far behind technologically as you might think. We develop our tribal land into cities, build mines and quarries, expand the dragon horde with plundered wealth, beat Gawed a second time, expand down into Reveria, and finally capture that troublesome island of Nimscod that has been a thorn in our side for our entire history. We choose to accept the gnomes after all this time. We've been enemies for so long, it's just time for peace. The gnomes may live as equals within the kobold nation. And among our new subjects and their captured libraries, we learn of a certain gnome who had been poorly hiding his blue scales. Tyakin. It can be no other. Yet we find no trace of him here. Oh, but we will find him in time. There are dragons out there in this world, and we will find them all. For we are their heirs. A dragon empire there was once, and so there shall be again. The dragons are our gods, and we shall build a realm for them to rule. And furthermore, a curious idea begins to become a movement. We look a little bit like dragons ourselves, don't we? Perhaps it might be possible for our kind, through science, artificery, and magic, to ascend beyond what we are now.
perhaps one day, we can become dragons. The great project will take centuries, but we will ascend. We must. We can't keep calling ourselves the Red Scale Tribe forever, though. How about Kobolds on? We develop our homeland further, but to truly push ourselves to our limits, we must look farther than petty Canorian geopolitics. We must look west to the lands enshrouded in mystery, the lands where the dragons themselves once made their home. Because before it belonged to elvenkind, Elantir belonged to our progenitors. Our rafts become exploratory caravels, and kobold explorers begin mapping and settling the frozen north of the ruined continent. There is so much to be done. We begin demonsterizing, which is little more than attempting to contact the humans around us and finally convince them that we're just normal people, okay? We're normal people who will become dragons one day, but until then, we're just normal people. It will be a long process. Do you know how much restraint it takes to arrest the adventurers who slaughtered a village and, give them a trial and send them back to their families while they shout at us about how it doesn't even make sense that mindless kobolds have built a courtroom? Which isn't a good legal defense, by the way. Anyway, decades roll by as the kobolds become early adopters of artificery, the blending of magic and machine. We empower our frail forms. We construct magnificent draconic bionics and learn all we can of the lost dragon homeland in Elantir. And then it finally happens. We learn of a dragon. Just one. Relatively young and isolated from its kind. He rules in the Innic Riverlands of Elantir. His influence reduced by the maniacal Battle King of the local Ruin-born elves. The Battle King refuses our efforts to set up a meeting, so we get prepared for some mighty colonialism. We push far inland with our colonists until our frontier finally touches the Battle King's borders. And when they do, kobold artificers crush hordes of Yinnick knights. Our first contact with the dragon is brief. He gives us some tasks to accomplish in order to prove that we're worthy. And upon doing so, he tells us that he's impressed. He's happy to become ally and friend to our people. But let's be clear, this dragon has spent his whole life with the Resentur elves, and he's not gonna go anywhere. He's not coming to us. A system is set up, with our new draconic demigod allowed to rule over the Yinnick borderlands for himself, as a twin empire of our own. Ascension grows closer. The dragon horde grows so vast that sometimes we hear cracking in the caves where we hold it. But that's probably fine. To the south, we've gotten so good at warfare that our traps are now getting outdated. Sure, we now have flamethrower traps and stuff, but who needs those when you've got the spark rifle? Our armies are actually competent now. We begin the oddly effective practice of turning the traps into mini hordes instead. The wealth of Western Canor trapped within our walls. They become an economic engine and trade center rather than a military asset. And yes, the spark rifle is still rare, only capable of being maintained by elite and well-educated artificer regiments. But for everyone else, we finally start to produce guns. Kobolds with guns. Gun kobolds. But it isn't all smooth sailing from here. We're an inventive people, but that doesn't mean we're always doing good science, does it? In fact, we're kinda just winging it here. We've decided that it's possible to become dragons, so every invention is recklessly approved to make that happen. Many kobolds, influenced by their gnomish brethren, begin embracing such preposterous notions as the scientific method and not making all of your technology look like dragons because you think it looks cool. These heretics reject the dragon cult and flee to southern Elantir, where they eventually form a scientific triarchy nation with exiled gnomes and goblins. They are a colossal thorn in my side, polluting the minds of good hard-working kobolds and filling them up with ridiculous ideas of rationalism. This kobold nation has gotten pretty damn far on reckless, insane, dragon-obsessed science, and we're not about to let those guys ruin a good thing for us. A forward base is set up, and soon we begin an all-out invasion of our rival technocracy. More wars will need to be fought, but for now, we've seized their ports, and thus eliminated their global reach.
Kobolds reigns supreme. It nearly seems as though we've little left to do from here, but wait for our artificers to finish discovering the secrets of our ascension, and for our armies to finish conquering and integrating the mundane world into our new dragon empire. Back in the heart of our homeland, yet another minecart full of treasure is dumped upon the great kobold horde. The rumbling has grown. They say that Maliath will wake soon, and thousands of kobolds make pilgrimage to the horde. There is a crack, a shuddering, and all at once the chamber collapses. In the distant depths, there is a splash as magma eats the greatest wealth hoard mortals have ever collected. And then it belches back up. Magma spews all across my capital, erupting wildly and breaking the very ceiling off our mountain. Ash and fire rains down all over northern Canor. Crops fail, cities burn, and the continent mourns a great day of fire. In the ruins, an odd blue figure looks out upon the second day of ashen skies. All of this could have been prevented. Perhaps it's finally time to end the madness of this reckless, parentless species. Maybe it's time for the dragons to lead their abandoned children. And this is where I will leave the Kobold campaign, with the Kobold's absent parents realizing their children might need a little guidance. I like to leave the Anbennar campaigns at the halfway point, so that you, the viewer, may pick up the campaign if you are interested, and you are allowed to go and finish the story and learn the rest of what happens. This was a wackier tale than what we got up to in the first Anbennar video, but it is a fun tale nonetheless, and the second half is just as good. Will you find the dragons? Will you ascend? But the story of the Dragon Coast did not have to go this way. You could have chosen to instead play as the gnomes, burning with revanchist zeal as they form a new hierarchy in the ashes of the kobold tribes. You could have played as Gawed, swallowing up the Dragon Coast and letting it serve as just one more geopolitical tool in your never-ending rivalry with Laurent. Or perhaps you want to play as those Reverians who had their fort stolen by the gnomes. I'm sure that a Viking kingdom would never be smart enough to adopt advanced gnomish technology, right? Right? Okay, now let's move on to the next faction. Gnolls. One of those background fantasy creatures that you fight and don't think that much about. They are far, far more prominent in Anbennar than they are in most other settings. Like with the kobolds, we sort of have to explain the stomping grounds of where we'll be playing. Thankfully, some of it we already covered in the last video. We covered the Empire of Castanor last time, talking about how Castan led his people to flee from a place called Keterata. But this time we will not be following their exodus, but remaining instead in Keterata. Quick rehash, this is an Egypt-like civilization. It sits on the place where the continents of Bulwar and Sarhal meet. Bulwar is a place where humans have been repeatedly subjugated by genies and god kings. Keterata turns out to be the very best bet for humanity in that era. A creature named Eliket arrives to make war upon the tyrants. Some say he was a Bulwari god who gave up his divine spark, or that he was simply the first Ket. Some say he made war upon the genies and created a vast river that crushed their fortresses. Others say that the river is the tears of the goddess Niraket, mother of Eliket, for her sorrow for her son's lost divinity is endless. This is why the people who came to settle the river began to call it the Mother's Sorrow. Alongside Eliket came the Ket, and I'm gonna be real with you, the Ket are cats. Well, the human body's cat heads, but their brains are cat the whole way through, let me tell ya. The Ket have divine power over the land surrounding the Mother's Sorrow, yet they cannot leave. They set sail up and down the river on pleasure barges and demand that the humans take care of them, give them treats, and rub their bellies, but not too much! This has been the way of Keterata from time immemorial. The humans take care of their cat gods, but are otherwise allowed to rule themselves without fear of tyranny like they would face farther east. The Mother's Sorrow runs right through the savannas that the Gnolls are native to, and trouble was inevitable. A war leader named Kra began terrorizing the towns and cities. His name became synonymous with slave raids. No, literally. The Gnollish word for slavery is kra. Proximity did not always lead to conflict. Some Gnolls pledged themselves to the Ket, and were in turn rewarded. Elliket even began expanding the river to accommodate loyal Gnolls, it is said. Mind you, the Keteratans largely put up with this because they said, hey, you Gnolls, you're really good at catching slaves and running off with them before anyone can stop you. Would you mind, getting us some slaves? It is likely in this way that Kastan's people came to be enslaved in Keterata. Loyal Ketist Gnolls asked by the humans to go on slave raids. Thus it was that most Gnolls around the Mother Sorrow became involved in the trade of bodies, be it for the Ket or against them. This relationship would eventually sour. Bronze Age Bulwar was ravaged by calamity. Deep devils emerged from the rivers and oceans to ravage the continent. Many kingdoms fell and disappeared forever. Keterata, however, was simply diminished. Elliket was slowing down, barely active anymore, and his kingdom was fragile. It was a poor moment in history for a Gnoll warlock to make a pact with a demon. There are creatures beyond the mortal plane, called Jazobs, that thirst endlessly for pain, suffering, and death. A Gnoll woman sacrificed enough slaves in Keterata to attract a Jazob and declare herself the first Jazobin. This immediately became the dominant meta strat for Gnoll gamers. Capturing a bunch of slaves, then sacrificing them for demon powers, it lets you capture more slaves than if you had just kept the original batch. It's real min-max type shit. Very competitive playstyle, all the other Gnoll gameplay is completely washed from here on out. This first Jazobin crashed upon Keterata like a thunderstorm. Sources say she killed Elliket, but it does seem more likely that she simply smacked him into a particularly thorough coma, since he seems to just come back every now and then. Keterata was conquered. During the chaos, a mass number of slaves quickly used the opportunity to flee for their lives, following a mystical figure named Kastan. The Jazobin turned to her new subjects and was like, listen, this here, it's not gonna work. We need most of you guys to administrate our new empire. I mean, I can't sacrifice all of you guys to my Jazob. So, we gotta go get those slaves before they get too far away. Thus, the first Gnollic conquest of Keterata was remarkably short, as the Jazobin and her host left behind a tiny garrison and then gave chase to the fleeing slaves. The Jazobin would eventually give up and return to Keterata after the legendary chase. And the Exodites would go on to found Castanor, the greatest human empire. The Gnolls remained in charge for a few generations, until Kastan Beastbane took a break from putting centaurs and fairies into a blender and decided that it was time to smash up all of the Gnollish factions in Keterata. Honestly, the conflict didn't really involve him, he just did it for love of the game. With the Jazobin dead, the Gnolls would scatter and raid. Petty warlords, all trying to cause enough suffering and death to attract the attentions of a Jazob. Now, the Gnolls have come off pretty poorly so far in our story, but let's be clear, this wasn't actually all of the Gnolls. These were the Gnolls who directly bordered Keterata, as well as all of the Gnoll bands that descended from them. There are plenty of other Gnoll groups who didn't end up in this cycle of slave catchers turned warlocks. There are multiple Gnoll bands you can play in Anbennar that still follow their ancient religion, Kvangafa, that's the one, which teaches that Gnolls, the crafty scavenger survivalists, were themselves remade by a goddess, who sought to salvage the souls of violent beasts by giving them sentient bodies. These Kvangafa tribes believe that the Jazob cults that hold most of their species in thrall are the work of demons who exploit the past beasthood of their race. Which, I mean, is pretty objectively correct, where's the lie? Many Kvangafa Gnolls do what they can to reconvert and recycle their Jazob brethren and their relics back to the old faith. Ironically, these Gnolls that follow the old ways end up fitting into the modern world by the end of the timeline much better than their more successful demonic counterparts. For their crafty and inventive way of life leads them to fit very naturally into the age of artificery. There were also gnoll bands to the northeast called the Sun Crown Gnolls, who fully integrated into Bulwari society. Now, we don't need to talk too much more about the gnolls and Keterata before we get in-game, because the history is really quite cyclical here. Different invaders keep subjugating Keterata, and then it's free for a while and then it's not. Worth mentioning is that they had a pretty important little scuffle during the Dragon Way, in which a dragon named Aket seized the throne in human form. He conquered a bunch of stuff before getting ousted by another dragon. And during Aket's conquest, he got really good at war, and everyone who was surrounding him also got really good at war. For the rest of basically forever, he would leave behind this, band of dragon-worshipping military officers who were all, a big organized clique. And no one could get rid of these guys because they were really good at war, and you'd really like them on your side, wouldn't you? You would win more battles if you just ignore that there's obviously dragon cultists. Just keep the dragon cultists around. Nothing can go wrong. Keep them! Meanwhile, the Gnolls declare another great Jaz every few generations whenever someone manages to attract a Jazob. The latest conquerors of the Ket peoples were the Sun Elves, who arrived a few hundred years ago to defeat the Red Jaz. And their subsequent empire then, of course, did their best Macedonian Empire impression. The Diadochi elven successors have largely failed to keep the Keteratans inside their empire, though the westernmost successor, Elisna, holds many of the important lands surrounding the Mother's Sorrow. The modern Keteratan kingdom is weak, fractured by civil war between those who directly follow the words of Eliket versus those who place more faith in the Mother, Niraket, as their outright deity. To the south, a band of gnolls have risen up. Grisaka, the Empress of Gnollkind, as she styles herself, has seized the middle parts of the Sorrow, and is determined to have the rest. She is powerful, talented, and Keterata is so weak and fractured. It would look, to outside eyes, as though the Mother's Sorrow is destined to be ravaged by another powerful Jazobin. But that's where we step in to take control. This is where we get to forge a fate for Gnollkind beyond either of the two diverging paths of our people. It is time for the Gnolls to find redemption. Redemption through cat ownership. Let's get started. This actually seems like a really good place to tell you guys that, I got a new cat. You'll see her every now and then when I'm on camera in various videos. Just thought I should say that now. Her name is Azura. I know that sometimes people ask about my old cat who used to appear in videos. Jesus Christ. Oi! That was Daisy. That was actually my mom's cat. But Azura is my cat. She's sweet. Anyway, moving on. Here we stand, Nolakaz, holding vast lands that we seized along the Sorrow. This is merely a stepping stone on the path to greater things, for Grisaka styles herself as the Empress of Gnollkind. All of the Jazob cultists have their quirks, like the ones that are obsessed with genies or the ones that make pacts with hags. Our particular clan has a fateful quirk. Grisaka's pack believes that the Ket are a type of demon, and some gnolls even trade the Ket offerings in hopes of making small pacts, just as they would any other demon. These Ketist lands we hold are already beginning to have an effect upon us. Times are changing, and we intend to stay the overlords of this place in the long term, and so we begin adopting the feudal structure of the locals. The Keteratans to the north are vulnerable, but we have a peace treaty with them due to having just stolen all their lands. Instead, I send my gnoll packs on a small war to the south to force our neighbor to become a tributary. But soon, the treaty is up, and the time has come to strike. I sacrifice many slaves to empower a few demonic gifts, and then we move north to seize as much of the Sorrow as we can take. And we can actually take a lot of it, in fact. With the vast lands we held before and all of the new stuff we've taken, we're easily the dominant power on the Great River now. Our demonic energies are strong, but small gifts to the Ket keep an uneasy peace between us for now. This is going to be our river, but there is much to be done before that can be made reality. elven pretenders, human remnants of Keterata, even other gnolls who had the same idea we did. Time goes by as we settle into our role as the great power of the Mother's Sorrow, and piece by piece, I bring the lands of Keterata under Grisaka's control. And once we're ready, Grisaka, now wealthy and powerful beyond measure, legions of slaves at her call, is ready to make a pact. But not with a Jazob. You see, the last few decades we've spent ruling the Sorrow has given the Gnolls plenty of time to look upon the Ket. Those aimless, hedonistic creatures. And many of the Gnollish rulers started to think, you know what? I think those guys might have the right idea, actually. And so, the Ketarch offers Grisaka a pact greater than any that a Jazob offered. Let your demon powers subside, she is told. Have your people turn away from the demons and turn instead to the teachings of Elliket. Treat the children of Keterata as citizens, not sacrifices. Do this, and you shall be steward of the Sorrow. No Jazobin or steward before her has ever so authoritatively ruled these two eternally warring people. The power of both civilizations combined for the first time. Grisaka accepts the offer, for how could she not? There is no Keterata any longer, nor is there Nolakaz. There is only the dynasty of Kanolkatep. We are, from nearly the moment we made this incredible deal, the strongest great power on this side of the world, rivaled only by the distant Hobgoblin Command. But there is much work to be done. Missionaries are sent, and the great conquering gnolls are converted quite readily to Eliketism. Decades spent in these lands, and our people are ready to taste of the Ket's power. Then there is the matter of the lands of Keterata itself. There is so much to be retaken from the various invaders and pretenders. Wars are fought to conquer the desert knolls of Bertica. An armada is slowly built up over a few years to overcome the island city-state of Elisna, who would dare style themselves as the elven overlord of our lands. But there are internal problems as well. The Ahati, the dragon-worshipping military cult, have always styled themselves as the great enemy of all gnolls. It's part of the reason that people have tolerated them up until now. They have stayed their hands against us for now at the behest of the Ketarch, but this seems unlikely to last forever. In a show of peace and willingness to cooperate, we bring these Ahati directly into our administration. We fought them before, and we know that they will make formidable allies. Can we trust a dragon cult who hates us? I mean, probably, why not? Decades pass. Grisaka dies of old age, but her dynasty continues on. Her ambitions did not die with her. Ambitions that saw the conquest of Keterata as nothing but a stepping stone for something greater. She was Empress of Gnollkind, and our state would spend nearly 2 centuries trying to make that claim true. The Sea Scourge Gnolls of Viacok, the Windhowler and Fieldstalker clans who follow the old ways, the violent slaver clans of Tlucht and Zaka, the Shadowpack Gnolls of the Swamps, and the plain-touched genie-obsessed Gnolls of Tsilakal. Each of them would be slowly conquered into our empire. Some integrated directly, but others were allowed to remain as vassals. Most of these Gnolls would accept our missionaries and accept Eliketism. A new type of gnoll was beginning to grow along our river. Not Pyreclaws, Windhowlers, Fieldstalkers, or any others. Sorrowmanes we began to call ourselves, and our traditions spread everywhere. Most gnolls could see our glory and reveled in the chance to join us as the chosen stewards of the Sorrow. The chance to have a piece of that Kettish decadence for themselves. But some did not bow when their tribes did. They would not trade the demon powers of the Jazob cult for the safety and wealth of the Sorrowmanes. But these were the friends and families of the recent converts. They could not be so easily purged, but nor could they be converted. A new strategy is devised. Just let them go. Worship their petty demons in the hills and crags, and in time they will begin to see our golden cities and weep for what they have missed out upon. They will convert to the ways of Elliket in time. And until then, Keterata is better defended than it has ever been by our armies. We can keep a few gnoll raiders in check. I mean, look at us, we've got gnolls with guns! Gun gnolls! We now consider ourselves a core people of the Sorrow, and many of the locals are beginning to believe that too. But the Ahati dragon cultists have always been clear that they reject that notion. They have gotten bolder, even when we gave them so many concessions. I find myself in a regency for a time, waiting for my young pack lord to come of age. Yet the regent is murdered by the Ahati. It's their final warning. Leave the Sorrow and let the Ahati hold the stewardship. We refuse, naturally, and the Ahati begin making their moves. It's not an instant revolution. There's a period of fighting them in the shadows and competing for military outposts. Then, when battle lines are drawn, the war begins. The Ahati underestimated the Great Gnoll dynasty, and it turns out to not be a very long or difficult conflict. Once the rebels are crushed, order is restored. The Ahati, even now, are just too ingrained in the society of Knolkatep. Plus, many Ahati regiments did actually remain loyal to us during the war. We can't really get rid of these guys, but with some targeted executions and reforms, the dragon cult will finally begin to accept us as the rightful dynasty. From there, I get back to work unifying the gnolls. In the deserts, the gnolls who once followed Zaka, Devourer of Suns, have been conquered by the Jad Legion, a religious organization which declares that all are worthy under the light of the sun god Suriel. Elliket, however, teaches us that Suriel has been dead since like forever, so it's all just superstition. Yet that doesn't change the fact that Zaka's gnolls have given up the Jazob cult en masse and become fanatic Jad faithful. The Jad is basically my only true rival in the region at this point, and when they ally with the distant hobgoblins, it gives me a good run for my money. But the combined forces of the Ahati, the Sorrowmane packs, and all of my vassals and tributaries, we force the hobgoblins out of the war and annex all of the Gnoll lands within Jad territory. There's a little mopping up left to do as I seize the remaining gnolls, and it finally happens. All gnolls now live within Knolkatep, or within one of our vassal states and satrapies. We Sorrowmanes have changed so much in these last 200 years. We're an integrated people of the river. We give offerings to the Ket, we abhor demons, and we read the teachings of wise Elliket. But the dynasty has allowed the lands beyond the Sorrow itself to be poorly supervised. Jazob cultists skulk in the crags, followers of the old ways hide their shrines. Our rulers spend nearly as much time lounging aboard pleasure barges as the actual Ket do. We have been good stewards of the Sorrow, but we have been poor rulers everywhere else. And then, the Night of Stars. Demons bid their cultists to act in unison, kidnapping countless civilians from isolated villages and burning them on the first true sacrifice to the Jazobs in nearly 2 centuries. My forces rush about ineffectually to try and understand why the frontiers have suddenly gone dark. A Gnoll woman walks among the cultists. She lines up yet more prisoners. She has killed so many with her knife, and yet no dark patron has emerged? She understands. The Jazobines were an old concept from a world that no longer exists, a time before the rise of black powder. She puts down her demonic blade and takes up a stolen gun. Over and over, she slays the captives until there is no more stolen ammunition left. But she's so close to making the pact. She fires the gun once more, not with lead, but with fell energies. Her eyes glow green with insatiable fury and power. The first Jazobine in centuries has emerged to bring down our empire. A gunpowder Jazobine. The West slowly secedes as my troops desperately flee from the territory of the great gunpowder Jaz. Many gnolls were only with the Sorrowmanes because that was the way that the wind blew. They went turncoat the moment something more promising came along. We fortify what we can until the Jazob cult makes their play. 250,000 Jazob cultists hopped up on demonic fury emerge from the western territories like a storm, pouring out upon the Sorrow. The generals drag our decadent steward and his son off the pleasure barges. They have enjoyed their lives of luxury, but now it is time to lead. a task they are wholly unsuited for. The gunpowder Jazobine emerges, her arms melded together with her demon gun, and she sacks the royal encampment. The royal family are loaded into cannons and fired into the sky, screaming as they are burned alive in green fire. The armies despair. The throne is passed to some distant relative, a bookish scholar who does nothing but ponder the words of Eliket. Nevertep is his name, and he won't be enough. Everyone can see it. We are barely holding on against the tide, the Jazz battering itself upon our defenses as we lose more and more ground every day. They want the capital for their own. The gunpowder Jazobine would descend upon the city, crack open the Great Pyramid, and consume the slumbering god Eliket. Nevertep slips his handlers as the empire collapses around him. He descends the tomb of Eliket, a labyrinth full of traps and false turns. A poison dart strikes his hand, and he's forced to cut it off. These are the last days of Knolkitep, and of Keterotan civilization itself. Everyone can see it. Nevertep stumbles into Eliket's final resting place. He's dying of blood loss. Eliket emerges, golden, divine, but also tired. He prepares to smite down the gnoll who dares intrude upon his chamber. Nevertep bows down and explains to Eliket that his people, the gnolls, have served as stewards of the sorrow for some time now. He begs for help. Nevertep has studied every word that Eliket has left behind, but none of it is enough to stop the gunpowder Jazobine. Eliket reminds the steward that even he failed to kill the first Jazobine, and he's much weaker now. Eliket has all of the powers of the divine, but it's held within a mortal body. It has damaged him, broken him, and after all these millennia, he cannot even leave his tomb. He shouldn't even be alive. It is time, Eliket says, to pass on his divine spark. Though he never thought it would be to a gnoll. Nevertep emerges from the tomb with a golden arm. He rises high above the city, and uses the great divine magic he now holds to set the situation to right. His golden magic begins to turn the tide. Jazub cultists are not brave. They sided with the gunpowder Jaz because they smelled blood in the water. Nevertep the Reborn rends them limb from limb with divine fury and pushes them back with unstoppable magic. From then on, it's just a game of numbers. The Jazub cult will never again attract new gnolls to their Jaz, not now that they fight a strong and determined foe. But can they finish the job and overcome our newfound war magics with what armies they have? They are not up to the task. The war of flame and shadow stretches on as we push them farther and farther back where they came from, the Jazobine failing every time to stop me. The final battle against a Jazobine. Eliket failed. But Nevertep must not. It's a battle of divine proportions, literal myth. The gunpowder Jaz ends with its mistress exploding, trying to take out the new god with her. Nevertep is left gravely wounded, his divine spark severely reduced. But the Jazobine is dead, and he is not. After so long in the thrall of demons, it had to be a gnoll who finally slew the last Jazobine. The Jazub cult was finally dead and gone. The gnolls forever free from it. But there is so much left to do. Our empire does not yet rival Eliket's at its height. Nevertep must regain his divine spark, and all the world shall have to contend with the fact that the empire of the Mother's Sorrow is ruled by a living god. I have once again left the story halfway done. As always, it could have gone a different way. You could have played as any of the native Keterotans, including the dragon cultists, and pushed the gnolls out once and for all. You could have played as Bertica, and descended into Eliket's tomb yourself, not to be gifted his divinity, but to feast upon his corpse. Knolkitep's story continues through the mission tree, but believe it or not, it also continues in the Victoria 3 mod that is coming out soon. Everything we just covered is canon. You can bring Knolkitep into the modern age. I think in the official canon, the gunpowder Jaz happens in like the 1700s, so a lot later than it did in my game. which means that basically if you pick it up in Victoria 3, you're picking it up after not too far of a time skip from where I left off. Now, I believe we have one last monster to cover. Goblins. The Goblins of Anbennar have less of a direct and linear story than the other creatures we've discussed. It is instead a grab bag of different tales of many disparate people separately struggling to gain their freedom. The origins of the goblins is presented in the lore as having two different possible explanations, though one is much more likely to be a red herring. Some surface-dwelling scholars, be it for reasons of surface goblin pride or a sort of surface-centric worldview, believe that goblins originated in the deep woods, those vast, fey-haunted woodlands that once covered most of Escan. The goblins were already there when the Castanites arrived, and they had assumed that the little green tricksters were yet one more type of fey determined to torment them. This theory was of course easily disproven by a 5-minute conversation with any of the dwarves of Cugdir, but the theory of fey goblins would be disproven for the more superstitious surface dwellers during the Green Tide, when the orcs erupted from the Serpent Spine, dragging untold hordes of enslaved and obviously mundane goblins with them. The Serpent Spine Mountains had their history covered more fully in my other Anbennar video, but let's review quickly. It's a big mountain range that was said to be the spine of a great serpent slain by the gods before the world formed. Fun fact, during the Dragon Wake, the Kobolds all appeared and started chanting about Maliath, the dragon god. The humans found out about this and went, "Oh, Maliath, that was probably the serpent that got killed. That's the Serpent Spine. Our god obviously killed your god because our god is better." Meanwhile, the Kobolds, who had never heard before any potential theory about their god being dead, just decided, "I guess our god is dead, but only some of him, and he'll be back." And everyone just kind of universally decided amongst themselves that the Serpent Spine was actually a dragon spine, without paying it much further thought, or bothering to think about the fact that they'd never thought that the Serpent Spine was a dragon spine until now. Anyway, during the Gods' War of prehistory, the dwarves discovered that much of this fossilized spine was hollow, and they hid inside and built a big advanced civilization there. The elf Ducaniel, winner of at least 17 consecutive Did Nothing Wrong awards, invaded, butchered as many dwarves as he could, and then invented orcs to finish the job when he got stuck. For thousands of years, the orcs prowled the Serpent Spine, wiping out the vast majority of the dwarves, save for a few stubborn dwarfholds that have largely been isolated for 10,000 years. A great orc warlord named Korgus united orckind and led them to invade the surface. This event was called the Green Tide, and it shattered and depopulated the entire region of Escan for around a century. But in this story of dwarves and orcs and elves and men, there has always been another species down there lurking far beneath the notice of history. The goblins are likely the native species of the Serpent Spine, though not its only one. And even then, there is no single goblin species. Instead, it's sort of a family of related creatures. Bugbears, hobgoblins, and of course, the common goblin. They all are theorized to share the same ancestor, according to the scholars, the Tusoric goblin. The common and most numerous goblin is clearly much smaller and frailer than the other goblinoids. Thus, the scholars theorize that the common goblin must have evolved that way due to the many thousands of years they spent hiding from dwarves and kicked around by orcish slavers. These goblins were everywhere in the Serpent Spine, and across many thousands of years of oppression. They still managed to have their comeuppance every now and then, though. During the Dwarven era, the goblins were able to find their way to the primordial depths below the Serpent Spine, where the dead bodies of Leviathan lava monsters released Helana's breath, which rushed upward to give new life to the world above. These deep goblins were able to build a civilization down there that rivaled the one of the dwarves above. Their vast cities would in time be broken and conquered when the Obsidian Dwarves, cast-offs from the Dwarovar that practiced forbidden magic, escaped the other clans down there. It seemed as though there was nowhere in the Serpent Spine that goblins could go where they were capable of staying free for long. In the Serpent's Reach region, many free goblin clans found themselves voraciously and unexpectedly attacked by Korgus Dukinson. who brought his great host there hunting for slaves before his wars on the surface. Thus, before the gates of Cugdir broke and sent millions of orcs pouring in a green tide across Escan, several large, terrified, free clans of goblins came rushing down upon the lands of Bulwark from the ruined dwarven holds in the area. These are the Exodus goblins. They were attacked on sight, but the local Bahari peoples were busy in a period of strife, and the refugee goblins were able to survive and even win. At game start, there are several of these Exodite goblin clans that have managed to settle in the hills and the forests of Bahar. An uneasy peace hangs over the region. Yet none of these clans are more famous than the Marbleheads. They are the goblins who fled en masse through the ruined dwarven Marblehold, full of statues from an ancient civilization far beyond their reckoning. And when they emerged and were attacked by the Bahari, these Exodites knocked the heads off the statues and wore them as helmets. To the surprise of the locals, these Marbleheads, although very silly looking, were remarkably hard to kill with ranged weapons, and they packed a lot more punch when charging than a goblin normally would. These Marbleheads pushed harder than any other clan, seizing the famous city of Akatbar and forging an uneasy peace in the region. Now, these Marblehead goblins, or any of the other clans if you're playing as them, find themselves in a diverse region of elves, dwarves, harpies, and humans, and to the surprise of all, these long-suffering goblins are more than capable of bringing peace and racial tolerance to Bahar, after an age of incompetent elven rule. But what about the goblins that did get taken by Corgus Dukinson? Well, they were dragged to Escan in the Green Tide and were caught up in the war there. But after the war, there are a few independent goblin clans kicking around, but they are largely doomed to be slaughtered or enslaved in the great conflict between adventurers and orcs. The more successful survival strategy among the ex-slaves was to instead travel west into human lands, where they would begin to inhabit ghettos throughout the Empire of Anbennar. Yet it was in the city of Bayvik, an independent merchant port threatened by the Gawedi Eagle, that would most readily invite the Eskani goblins in. Goblins and humans lived and traded and fought side by side as equals there. Eventually, with the discovery of Aelantir, a few goblin merchants in Bayvik collaborated to sponsor an expedition to the Haraf Savannah, where they hoped to build a new homeland for their people. But human lands were not the only ones that the goblins wandered into. Many goblins were dragged along with the orcs, who marched into the Fey-infested deep woods south of Escan. There they found themselves yet again stuck between warring sides, though this time they were set upon by the local wood elves. Yet to their mutual surprise, there were already goblins in these woods, and they had been here for thousands of years. The Serpent Spine's not like airtight or anything, the goblins were able to get out. That said, the local goblins were not in a good state. The elves had driven them to near extinction, and they were forced to hide in dark groves and make difficult choices to survive. With the know-how of the local goblins and the sheer numbers of the ones that had been dragged here, a new way was forged. The ex-slave Weeblig became one of the most enigmatic figures in Anbennar. The goblin approached one of the great fey creatures of the wood and made a pact with them. A warlock pact. Weeblig's story is complicated and obscured by both fey magics and also time travel shenanigans. The goblins might just survive in these cursed woods, with their many complicated fey pacts guiding them. Or perhaps they will reject the fey outright and simply rely on goblin ingenuity to build the wealthiest lumber cartel in the world. Now, that's the surface goblins introduced, but surely you're wondering about the hobgoblins I mentioned earlier. Where the common goblins were subjugated and oppressed throughout all history, the hobgoblins of the Dwarovar jade mines were able to retain most of their freedoms. The hows and whys are not explicitly outlined, though we do know that the hobgoblins became the single most anti-magic civilization on the planet. They survived countless wars over thousands of years, and over it all, they built up a warrior ethos and strict systems of loyalty. When great elven empires rumbled on the surface and Corgus began uniting the orcs, the hobgoblins soon decided that the old ways of small, elite, and loyal families and clans must be repurposed in favor of a unifying stratocracy. The goblins would come together as one, as they had only done a few times in their history, but they had never done it with this much unity or martial intention. This wasn't quick or easy to accomplish. Even when the idea became a widespread movement among their populations, there were still multiple different federations, each one claiming to be the command. But in time, an arrangement was worked out. 3 separate commands, all existing within one great command. The task was done. The hobgoblins were united and ready for war. When the orcs rumbled out from the mountains to the northwest, so too did the hobgoblins do the same in the far east. This is the most dramatic way I can explain to you all that the green tide was actually the serpent spine exploding out of both ends. But while Corcus was beaten, the command never was. At game start, the militarily dominant command has conquered the northern lands of Rahen, and shown to the entire continent that the Harimari who rule over it are a race of paper tigers. They loom over the entire Far East. At game start, the command is in fact the single strongest faction in the game, though the story of what this terrifying horde of hobgoblins do to the east is a story for another video. Another video that I really want to make, so please like this video and drop a comment. Helles has terror bird riding nomads, gold scale kobolds, Oni who wish to corrupt elven precursor tech, and just more spirit than the locals even know what to do with. God, Anbennar fucking rules. Okay, so all of those goblins are goblins that we are not going to be playing today. I know, they were pretty neat goblins with unique narrative arcs. But all of these surface migrations have left out the fact that many goblins managed to hide away when the orcs attacked the surface. That means there are now countless scattered goblin groups all across the Serpent Spine, poking their heads out in wonder that most of their oppressors have just left. There are dwarves here though now, attempting to reclaim their old glories. So too are there remnant orcs who would restore goblins back to their place beneath a boot. The remaining goblins, skulking about their ancient homelands, have a very narrow window of time to build themselves a stable society in the dark dwarven ruins. One such figure is a simple goblin with fledgling magic powers. His name is Dak. Let's see if he can make something of his little tribe. Except, well, I'm sure you see the remaining video length. Last Anbennar video, I chose to stream the dwarf playthrough, instead of keeping it in the video itself. In large part, this is because gameplay in the Serpent Spine is particularly more gameplay focused than story focused. The goblin playthrough here is also part of the Serpent Spine. Dak is one of the most beloved leaders and factions in all of Anbennar, but it's also a gameplay first experience, not really a story focused mission tree. Date of the stream is flashing right now on screen. And if you're watching this video after that stream date, then you'll find the stream VOD linked down below in the description. The monsters of Anbennar may not be human, but I hope today I've shown that they're certainly not lacking in humanity. These are complex creatures with diverse belief systems, goals, and dreams. And yeah, I mostly chose to show you monster tags that were somewhat sympathetic today, but there are a lot of Anbennar monsters who are immensely evil, and also really fun to play. Anbennar continues to be my favorite third-party D&D world, and I hope you guys enjoy it whenever we get to visit it in one of these videos. And if you did like it, please don't forget to leave a like on this video and let me know what you thought in the comments. I'm thinking if we do another one of these, well, I might do like the Great Powers of Canor, and I can properly catch you up then on the Lilac Wars and what the Empire of Anbennar even is. Or I also really want to cover the continent of Helles. We can even catch up then on the Gold Scale Kobolds, as well as my favorite faction in the game, Azjakuma, the Oni of the Demon Hills. And remember, Anbennar is a community project, and you can contribute to it. Head into their Discord if you're interested in learning more. Thank you all for watching. Remember to check out the Scorched Basin Kickstarter, and I will see you all soon.